Now we know from Matthew on the record that Immaculate Constellation is, in fact, a special access program code name that was brought in after Lue Elizondo went public in 2017 with the fact of the Pentagon's ATIP UAP UFO investigation program.
How many people are involved in different ways of keeping this secret, confusing the public, lying to Congress, lying to the world?
Simply put, it's a parallel reality. The secrecy apparatus is all pervasive. It is not just in the intelligence community governing their world. It's not just in the military protecting their operations. It's not protecting our diplomats and leaders as they conduct their work. It has been allowed to corrupt and infest every aspect of our society.
This mistake is going to create exactly the ammunition that skeptics want, which is instead of where the focus should be, which is on the very substantial sensor data, multiple military witnesses, all the scientific analyses presented by other panelists. They're going to jump on this and dismiss the whole thing. The UAP disclosure movement cannot afford basic errors when you're fighting decades of institutional resistance. I guess I'll just leave that there.
Make sure to check out the links down in your breadbasket. We got them all down there. Like the video, subscribe to the channel, share with your friends. Come find me at x.com/shotdown9.
Whistleblower goes public on Immaculate Constellation, alleges covert U.S. program monitoring UFOs. You were one of the first to talk about Immaculate Constellation. What did we learn here?
Okay, this is a very, very important story. This is a guy called Matthew Brown, who I think at the moment he's working for the State Department, but he was working for the Defense Department when he became aware of a lot of confidential UAP-related files that were on the JWICS server, the confidential servers used for communication inside the defense and intelligence community. And what he discovered formed the basis, he confirms, of the Immaculate Constellation document that was tabled in Congress last year. It's a very, very important fact that Matthew has now gone on the record and admitted his credentials to my friends and colleagues George Knapp and Jeremy Corbell.
Ross fucking Coulthart. Starting off with Immaculate Conception, Matthew Brown, the newest government insider whistleblower, who actually kind of seems to be a whistleblower, even if it turns out that what he's talking about is not what he thought it was. But he is a guy who's coming out with new info that has not been openly discussed and widely documented for 90 years. So maybe we actually got a guy with a whistle who's blowing it. Seems like. The debunkers and the detractors have decided that they figured out that Matthew just kind of ran into a misfiled War Games document and has misinterpreted it. The other kind of fun stuff that Ross Coulthart talks about there is that Matthew Brown, the whistleblower, says that, you know, after David Grush's arrival publicly, mentioning David Grush or talking about David Grush or anything Grush related was not okay. You know, in his circles inside the government at his job. And that if you were discussing it, mentioning it, etc., that you get a stern talking to fairly quickly. And the last part there for Ross is he thinks that this guy was probably one of Grush's whistleblowers that didn't get into the congressional hearing for whatever reason, or maybe wasn't one of Grush's guys then. At any rate, Ross thinks that the guy is credible and that Congress should have him on, which is funny. Because the next question is about age of disclosure. They call it Lue Elizondo's age of disclosure because he's one of the 2 executive producers. And so they say, well, where's this disclosure thing at? Where's this show? And Ross says, well, they're working on it and it's hard. It's kind of funny. This week, to ask Ross about a whistleblower that was news this week, and then to ask Ross about Elizondo's disclosure, which was not news this week. There's a couple other questions in here. I guess one of the main ones is about why is there so many Mormons involved in the project? They kind of detail it down here. Immaculate Constellation, Age of Disclosure, Elizondo's documentary, UAPs in the Mormon Church, Ross on the Knights of Malta. Doesn't say much. He basically says he's working on it. He's interested in Knights of Malta, and because of Malmgren, he's gonna do something about it. He's gonna interview people and do some documentaries, etc. Ross on alleged military abductions, says their thing, and then the Todd Morden incident. And so this is from May the 4th, which is days after the UAP congressional hearing that happened this week and is news this week. Days ago, Immaculate Constellation was also news this week. So he's asked about it and answered about it. But even when talking about Lue Elizondo for a brief moment, does not even mention the UAP congressional hearing, which was obviously an absolute train wreck for specifically Elizondo. So it's interesting. It's more than interesting. It's really damning for Ross and for other members of the Elizondo camps and adjacent camps and related camps that the UAP hearing happened the way that it did, and then basically there's this first official opportunity to even mention it and just doesn't mention it at all. Even when asked about Elizondo, doesn't even mention it. Not even a little joke. So if that alone kind of illustrates Ross Coulthart's position in the ufology ecosystem. And it's really telling. I think it's really enormously important for us to recognize that he'll cast shade immediately on someone like Ashton Forbes and do zero research and not go. He says he talked to one guy on the inside, and that guy said, Ashton's full of shit. But he doesn't go and do any investigative process or investigative reporting on Ashton Forbes. But he'll, talk shit about him and say that he's a complete hoax. And, in the very next week, when he gets a chance to even just mention Elizondo's flub at the UAP congressional hearing this week, that's not even addressed. It's not even one of the 5 questions that they go over in this question and answers session. And I mean, honestly, why would they take the question on the age of disclosure, to which his answer basically is they're working on it, it takes time? Why would they even field that question and that answer when I'm sure, if they're just paging through the questions that they've received in the last week or last couple days, there had to have been at least one in there about Elizondo's UAP hearing photo. There'd have to be at least one. There's probably a whole shitload, but there'd have to be at least one. So this is, pretty blatant whitewashing of the incident by leading ufologist reporter Ross Coulthart.
There really isn't room for people to act according to their conscience and our constitutional ideals on the inside.
Is it your belief, based on materials, things that you've been exposed to, that you've seen, people you've talked to and communicated with over a period of a couple of years, is it your belief that the technology, the race for the technology, the understanding of the big secret is entirely in the hands of people outside the government and not for the benefit of the public or to protect American national security? It's in some other realm, in some other hands.
I think it's a mix. I think our military, has a long historic involvement in this. So does our intelligence community and our scientific academic community. We have, as a country, allowed ourselves to be penetrated, co-opted, and corrupted by an internationalist force that serves their interests and views nations, peoples as tools and means to an end.
Jeremy Corbell, George Knapp, Weaponized, Immaculate Constellation, UFO Whistleblower Goes Public, Weaponized, episode number 74, part 1. Matthew Brown, the author of the Immaculate Constellation document that Jeremy Corbell gave to Congress, Nancy Mace, and etc., which kind of started Jeremy Corbell's crybaby meltdown because he wasn't given credit for the document. They said they had Schellenberger on there and they gave him credit. And there seems to be some kind of very odd validity going on, because why would any of it work that way? It is weird. Jeremy Corbell's sensationalized crybaby, meltdown on camera at every opportunity for about 2 or 3 weeks there kind of took away from the fact that it actually happened. If he didn't do the whole crybaby thing, it might have splashed a lot bigger. Because it does seem like, for some reason, they tried to just not say Jeremy's name. And it could be because when you link yourself to Corbell, now you're linking yourself to the Corbell clan and all the things inside the clan and all their tactics. And so at least Nancy Mace didn't want that for whatever reason. But, and then, Corbell kind of proves everyone right by flopping on the floor and crying, straightening out his backpack 1,600 times. We could have just done this. Right? This episode right here should have been his response. He should have just really should have already had it ready. If he's as smart as he pretends to be, and he's got George Knapp there, who seems to be about as smart as he pretends to be, you'd think they would have had that ready, right? So they could have released, no matter what happened at the congressional hearing, they could have released this episode literally as people were walking out of that chamber. So this process, the Corbell process, the sensationalism, it really takes away from what they're actually talking about. And so, with all that being said, this is a great interview. It's a good classic Weaponized episode with with George Knapp kind of taking the reins as the investigative, old school, OG UFO journalist. Anyways, this guy comes off as pretty authentic. And I would say, I mean, he's really one of the first whistleblowers. And there's been several, but he seems like one of the first whistleblowers. Definitely one of the first guys that Corbell has called a whistleblower, who's actually out there blowing a whistle. Right? He's risking his job, which is, like I haven't said yet, but I'll say it right now. It's kind of suspicious that he hasn't been fired or disciplined in some way for doing this interview. Because what he's talking about and the way he's talking about it, it's got to be illegal. You know, he says in here, you know, risking everything. Risking life and limb, never going to have a family now, etc. I don't know if that's true. We've never really seen it happen to anybody. You know? We've never really seen it happen. None of these guys have been scooped up and thrown in jail and never to be heard from again. And there's a few. You could try and find them, right? Edward C. Lynn, Gary McKinnon. But, you know, Bob Lazar doesn't seem to have faced any actual consequences over the last 50 years. Not that we know of. Not that aren't seemingly basically just sensationalism. Seems to be doing okay. So anyways, this guy, you know, he's an intelligence community analyst. He says he has access to basically anything and everything. He's going through the stuff one day, kind of doing some extracurricular homework, finds some files. He's looking for files that are misfiled and mislabeled, and he's refiling them and relabeling them, and finds a document about a war game. And now we have Immaculate Constellation, which he says is a special access program that's set up in the wake of the 2017 New York Times article by Les Lupine and Ralph Blumenthal, featuring Lue Elizondo, Chris Mellon, and the following 3 famous ufology videos, the Gimbo, the FLIR, and the Go Fast, that have, you know, fueled discussion in all directions in ufology and on Twitter and on X and YouTube and everywhere since. So it says the new program, Immaculate Constellation, is an overarching program that was set up to take over where all the other programs that had just been exposed by Mellon and Elizondo. And that's kind of it. That's kind of Immaculate Constellation. There's more to his story where he, you know, tells a cool story about, you know, finding some other videos in there. One of them being an encounter between a small Russian fleet that's hanging out, you know, in the ocean. And you got an American asset there, submersible asset, taking pictures and video, paying attention to the Russian fleet, and a triangular shaped UFO shows up. And the Russians don't freak out. They don't seem to act like they weren't expecting a triangular shaped UFO to just appear kind of out of nowhere. This guy says decloak. It's not like it flew over to them or descended down on them. It just appeared. And like I said, you watch this interview, you watch this guy, you read his document that's been out for whatever, 6 weeks, 2 months, something. He does not seem too wacky. He doesn't seem wacky at all. And at no time does he say anything like, yeah, I know everything about UFOs and aliens, but I can't tell you because of reasons. He only says the exact opposite. He says, this is what I know, this is what I'm telling you, and I'm risking everything to do it. What's part 2 going to be about? Part 2 is going to be about the various types of persecution he's faced since mentioning Grush's name and letting Jeremy have this document and now showing up on this podcast. Maybe tell us some more cool UFOs and alien stories that he's seen videos of. This is a very different situation, very different presentation than Grush or Lue Elizondo or even the Navy Tic Tac videos. So this is fun. It should have been kind of the big story this week, and it's definitely ended up as not the big story this week. But it really should have been. This is what ufology should be arguing about in all the different corners of X and etc. And really not even there because of the UAP congressional hearings with Lue Elizondo and his pals that happened like the day after this release. This should have been like on Tuesday. April 29th, that's probably Tuesday. Let's look. Yeah, Tuesday this came out. I think the hearings were Wednesday or Thursday, I'm not sure. And the hearings definitely overshadow basically everything else in ufology.
Now, Lue Elizondo did show a photograph of a UAP or a UFO during the presentation. I'm showing this. This is a better version from the X feed that the Fund for UAP Disclosure put out. This has been mercilessly ridiculed and mocked online. And, you really do have to acknowledge here. I mean, yes, Lue did state he cannot vouch for the veracity of the photograph. He didn't take it. It says not vetted. But you really have to think here. This is the second time that he has stepped into something like this. This happened about less than a year ago, with another photograph that was shown not to be an actual UFO. So, you really have to just recognize that this is a time you've got to be careful when you're putting evidence out there. This was not vetted. It is questionable evidence. And clearly the skeptics are going to jump all over it. You've got Representatives Luna and Burleson. They're staking political capital on this briefing, which included very significant claims about, recovered non-terrestrial craft, NORAD detection capabilities. We'll get to that. So this distraction, that's really what this looks like it could be, is very likely to overshadow testimonies from other witnesses. Can we say bombshells? Well, it depends on who you talk to, but I would say yes, I think so. The density of new and fresh information reaching the general public on this subject of UFOs just seems unprecedented to me. I've talked about this a few times already, but the point bears repeating. We are in a heightened phase of public release of information on what used to be called UFOs. The quantity and I must say the quality of information is at a level I just don't think that we have reached this before. Maybe the David Grush revelations of 2 years ago are really the only comparable point that I can think of. And I don't know if this is bigger than the David Grush revelations. Probably not, but it's combined. What we've seen this week is really quite remarkable in any case. And what's also noteworthy is that I think despite all of this, you can expect more resistance, more hostile debunking. It's become evident to me that the more information that we are seeing out there that's coming out on this subject, the more that the more we can expect the establishment, and this includes not just government, but a number of private players, let's say the media, many aspects of the media, Wikipedia for sure, much of academia, many other institutions, they will continue to come down hard against this.
Richard Dolan, Intelligent Disclosure, 3 UAP bombshells, Immaculate Constellation, Puthoff, and Congress. The Richard Dolan Show. This is an amazing Richard Dolan episode. I'd say it's classic. It's amazing. It's full of his little info charts. This is a great companion piece, really, to anything that you would be paying attention to that is ufology related this week. And it doesn't even have to be this week, but he puts it, better than I would have, as he says, well, here's 3 bombshells. The Immaculate Constellation witness author comes out and is on Weaponized. We got Hal Puthoff on Joe Rogan, and then the congressional UAP hearing. And so, yeah, that's what happened this week in ufology. All 3 of those kind of big things happen. And unfortunately for ufology, the congressional UAP hearing overshadows all of that. I haven't decided to do much with the Joe Rogan Puthoff interview. Puthoff did not say anything on Joe Rogan that he basically hasn't said on like umpteen million other podcasts before now. And, you don't want to spend a lot of time basically like talking shit about Puthoff, but for all of his mental powers and remote viewing and involvement in the government and claiming on Weaponized that he was playing the stock market using remote viewing to fund Black Project programs, we never get anything beyond basically that statement. And you can watch hundreds of hours of remote viewing coverage, ufology related remote viewing topic on YouTube. Chris Ramsey, you name it. They're all covering it. They've all been covering it. They've been covering it for years now. It's really the reason I got into watching the Chris Ramsey UFO Area 52 channel. Is because I wanted to kind of focus in on the parts of ufology that were kind of the most creepy, the most heebie-jeebiest. And that leads you into crop circles and abductions and remote viewing. But none of them ever really talk about anything new or different. Like I said, you could watch 100 hours. You probably don't need to. You could probably get almost all the info that you need without going to the Monroe Institute yourself in about 2 to 9 hours of remote viewing ufology coverage across all the different clans and camps and podcasts. And so it's not like Hal Puthoff went on there and did some remote viewing or brought some remote viewing evidence or showed us where a UFO or an alien is, or even said where one was. So, the Puthoff interview, I'm sure, is getting tons and tons of views and clicks, but it's not anything that you couldn't have got by just watching him show up on Weaponized a year or 2 ago. Which is, it's disappointing, and it's deflating, and it sets the backdrop for the UAP hearing to happen the way that it did. And so this is a great companion piece. Like I said, all of his little infographics, slides that he puts up here are pretty good. So I would keep him in his own separate little window, put him on mute, swap between the slides, and just watch through everything else ufology this week, including the UAP hearings. And each one of his little slides here are probably like essential, required ufology reading. And this isn't long. It's an hour. He covers 3 topics. And within each one of those topics, he covers them in great depth with, these infographic slides that are pretty informative. So even just reading through each one of his slides is going to take you most of this hour. So this is highly informational. And, he says stuff, right? Like Immaculate Constellation, linking it to all the Black Triangle topics and incidents over the years. The significance of just the way that the whistleblower, the Immaculate Constellation whistleblower, is speaking of these topics, like the culture of Pentagon UAP secrecy, and kind of the casual breakdown of the conspiracy, the cover-up, and the update, which leads us to Hal Puthoff, Ingo Swann, etc., Joe Rogan, the culture creep, and then we get to the UAP hearing. So Dolan goes through each speaker, which is kind of the best way to approach it. And what I would normally say about the UAP hearing, we're going to talk about it a lot in the next video, is that they've really done a disservice by grouping these characters together. Christopher Mellon, Lue Elizondo, Admiral Tim Gallagher, Eric Davis, Kirk McConnell, and Avi Loeb. And in all that, I mean, really, McConnell and Avi Loeb do not belong in that group. And Avi Loeb, I'll say, and have said all over X and everywhere, he's really a courageous character to stand here with these other jokers and give his presentation. Like, he's really trying hard to get the funding that he's asked for. And Richard Dolan gets to it in here. He says, well, look, he even Richard Dolan, he has to take McConnell and Estevez and Loeb and squish them all into one slide. Like, they don't really belong with these other jokers. You know, Elizondo showing a picture of they're calling it an irrigation circle. It's a field on a farm that has gigantic sprinklers on it that rotate in a big circle. And they can hook all their machinery and all their equipment to the big circle machine and grow their crops in a fairly automated manner. So irrigation circles. And they're super obvious. You don't even have to be a pilot. You don't have to be a farmer. You don't have to be a person that's an expert in any type of industry to look at probably any aerial picture that's featuring irrigation circles to know what those things are. Like, they're not new. And so, Richard Dolan addresses that in kind of a nice way. In Richard Dolan's general manner in ufology is to go along to get along. So he's rarely criticizing anyone. But I'd say this is the closest thing you get from him as a real hardcore criticism. He says, well, look, even if we give Elizondo the benefit of the doubt in all directions, his actions at the UAP hearing are complete buffoonery and bring down buffoonery on all the other people in the room and everyone else who's even remotely related to even covering or watching this UAP hearing. And he mentions, which is worth a mention, especially if we're going to try and upscale from ufology to a more kind of serious level Congress, is that you've got these Congress people there, Luna and Burleson, who are putting their prestige on the line by even broaching this topic and then having a hearing and having these people there. And so you've got Luna and Burleson standing there while Lue's holding up this picture. And the fact that Lue's holding up this picture is of itself pretty freaking crazy. And this is what happened this week, is this one picture completely dwarfed and made all these other slides of Richard Dolan's and entire life works of huge swaths of people in ufology basically worthless. This one picture could have set back ufology at least to 2016 to pre-New York Times article levels, even though we're kind of already there anyways. But it might be even more damning and worse because this is so obvious. And, Richard Dolan says, well, it's just definitely not helpful to the people or the topic.